There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this week on the show, I'm joined by Tony Peterson to answer your questions. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by First Light. Today, we are talking the rut. As this one drops, it will be kind of smack dab in the middle of November, so we're going to be talking about what has just happened and what we still have to look forward to over the coming weeks. And then we're going to, big picture here, answer a whole bunch of questions. We had a whole slew of questions submitted from folks in the Wired Hunt community about hunting during the rut, about the second half of the rut, about how to find deer the rest of the season, all kinds of stuff like that. So we're tackling your questions, and joining me is the one and only space nerd, Tony Peterson. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing great, buddy. How are you?
Good. I'm getting a little more rested after that marathon we had there in early November. So, yeah, feeling good. Are you good, recovered yet?
I feel pretty good now, man, but I was pretty tired after that whole run too.
It was a good run. So last week on the podcast, I recapped my first week in November hunt. You want to give me like your high level synopsis of your 7 days there in Minnesota and Wisconsin? What was like your big A, what happened? B, what was your big takeaway?
Man, the first 3 days of the hunt I spent in public land in western Minnesota trying to figure something out, and just got my butt kicked. I got around some deer, but man, I could not overcome the 70 degrees, 40 mile per hour winds. It just had weird bad luck. And then I went to Wisconsin thinking it was going to be sort of a vacation, being on good private land there, and had 2 days of just pouring crazy rain, and then finally 2 days to hunt where the weather didn't suck. And even then it got better, but it wasn't great. And I had one 8-pointer kind of saved my week on the last morning. So that was very much appreciated, but I don't know. I'm sure I'm just not remembering it very well, but I don't know if I've ever had a rut that quite kicked my butt like that. I mean, I just could not get on them, and then just got really lucky toward the end and figured something out. And so my takeaway, I guess, is it's so easy to go into the rut thinking it's going to be just pure fun and a crazy chase fest and all that stuff. And most of the time it ends up being a true grind that's, influenced by other hunters and the weather and the whims of the deer. And it still requires you to really get after it.
Dude, that's like exactly my big takeaway too. And the biggest thing that kind of hit me as I was traveling out to start that hunt, and then especially when I was traveling home from it, maybe the biggest thing, like the biggest problem a lot of us have with the rut is our expectations.
Yep.
Like we all go into this thing thinking it's going to be, we hype it up so much. You and I are as much to blame about this as anyone, but we all hype it up so much in our own minds, and we celebrate it, and we're like, it's the Super Bowl, it's going to be amazing, this is what we wait all year for. So we all go into this thing thinking that November is going to be rainbows and butterflies and big bucks running everywhere, when the reality is what you experienced isn't too far off from, probably the usual experience for most people. A whole lot of tough hunts sprinkled in with a couple really exciting moments. But I think if we were to go into these hunts kind of better accepting that and just knowing like, all right, this is not going to be like a great big hunt and show highlight reel. This is going to be a grind, like you said. And maybe, just maybe, I'll get lucky and have that awesome moment. I think that might help some of us enjoy it more, because I always find myself out there pissing and moaning in my own head about, this sucks. This isn't what you dream of during the rut. This isn't like what you're supposed to get. This isn't what I was hoping for, when really it's just the real world.
Oh man, big time. And the saving grace of all of it, and this is something that, it has happened to me just about every time I've had, maybe 5, 6, 7 days to hunt in a row during the rut, you're going to get your chance. Like if you're putting in the time, it's probably going to happen. You're going to get your encounter, but it can be really, really mentally tough to ride it out and put in the time to where that's going to happen. And I think we do kind of build this up in a way that's just reality doesn't match it. And then you get out there and you just like smacked over the head. It's kind of like, when you prep for an elk hunt and you just think like, I cannot wait to get in the mountains. I'm in good shape. I got my gear ready to go. It's going to happen. And then you get out there and you start climbing elevation and you're like, oh yeah, like this is never easy. It's, I could get my chance, but I'm going to have to work for it. And it's just they're never going to come easy.
Yeah, that is the truth. But hey, we managed to pull it out. In our first week in November, we both killed, despite tough circumstances, me at the end, you in the beginning. So kudos to us. Handshakes, back slaps, all that good stuff. We managed.
Well, we got to carry the weight for, guys like Giannis and Clay. If they're not going to contribute, we got to step it up, I guess.
Even with extra days.
Yeah. Even with their golden boy high on the totem pole, throw a little fit, get a couple extra days thrown in there, they still couldn't make it happen.
God bless them. Next time. We'll get it next time. Hey, not speaking of anything, but just popped in my head. Have you heard the Most Wonderful Time to Kill Deer song yet? Oh, dude. All right. Well, Hayden, cue the music.
Boys, good to see you. Hayden, it's been a while. Hey, sorry I'm late. I crashed my Pontiac Aztek into a light pole and had to walk the rest of the way, but I'm here now. That's what matters. Can you give me a glass of scotch, please, Hayden? Just 2 rocks in there. I don't like ice. We're starting already. This is happening. Okay, just give me the glass. Thank you. Okay, here we go. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. With the rut now just starting and dashing and darting and lanes cut and cleared. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. There's far too much ice in this glass. It's the happiest season of all. There's got to be at least 12 cues. With grunting and bleeding and cold fronts and sleeting the last weeks of fall. It's the happiest season of all. There'll be pictures for posting and bragging and boasting and truck beds with big bucks in tow. There'll be narrow missed stories and tales of near glories of booner bucks missed with our bows. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. Not just one, maybe 2. There'll be no does of blowing and luminox glowing and blood trails so clear. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. Hey, excuse me, can I have a napkin, please? I just spilled some scotch on my loafers. I can't have dirty loafers in the studio. Yeah, oh, thank you. Tailgate beers for drinking and big bucks a slinking and chasing and scent checking does. There'll be fighting and scraping and no more escaping and arrows shot true hitting home. Key change? What? No one told me. It's the most wonderful time to kill deer. I was very unprepared for this. There'll be much morning sitting and cold fronts hitting the dawn crisp and clear. It's the most wonderful time. Oh, the most wonderful time. Yes, the most wonderful time to kill deer. There's too much ice in the glass. 2 rocks.
All right. So, Tony, you didn't actually get to hear it. Everybody else got to hear it, but you didn't. So I'm going to make you listen to this later. But our podcast editors, Hayden and Phil, rewrote the song, The Christmas Carol, The Most Wonderful Time of the Year, and they rewrote it and recorded it as the most wonderful time to kill deer. And it is amazing. Everybody just got to listen to it for the 3rd podcast in a row. I'm gonna make this happen every episode in November. We're gonna listen to it again because I like it so much.
Good.
But with that celebratory tune out of the way now, Tony, I think we should turn to the main thing I want to do here, which is rapid fire Q&A. I got like 500,000 questions from folks. I asked folks in the Wired to Hunt community if they had any questions for this time of the year. You know, what to do during the middle of the rut, what to do as we get to the tail end of it, how should they be repositioning as we move into the second half of the season. And I got just tons and tons and tons of questions. So I thought, we haven't done something like this in a while. So it seemed like a good time to just address specific concerns, specific circumstances, and hopefully give some help to folks that are trying to make it happen right now. So, are you down for some Q&A?
Dude, I'm down. Do you remember the last time we did a Q&A?
No, I feel like it's been a while.
So this is how dumb my brain is. So we did that Q&A out in Bozeman when we were with Spence and Hayden. Matt, remember? And we got a question from a dude whose handle was Chalupa Batman. And I think about that once a day. I don't remember anything about that podcast other than giving Hayden's girlfriend the nickname the Rodeo Clown. And yes. A guy named Chalupa Batman asked us a question. That's it.
Oh, man, that is legendary. I would not have remembered that. That was like 2 years ago.
That was a while ago.
That's a very strange memory.
That's all I got, buddy.
Yeah, I do appreciate it. Well, let's do this thing, man.
All right.
Question number 1 comes from Tommy, and he's wondering, are all-day sits still good late in the rut? What do you think?
I would say they might be better.
Why is that?
Because I think you get into, the stage where they're locking down. They've had tons of pressure. A lot of gun seasons are open. And I don't think there's a better time to do something a little bit different than your competition than when we start getting to the back half of November. And I don't know about you, Mark, but when I run cameras through the whole rut and I check them, I get a lot of mature buck movement, like sporadic mature buck movement in the back half of November, and a lot of it's daylight movement. And I just think it's because people are kind of giving up and going, it's not worth it anymore. And, I get it. It's cold and you're not going to have, probably an all day long chase fest to keep you awake. But man, the chance to kill one at noon is real high still.
Yeah. I've seen it myself a few times. Now it's a little bit different for me in Michigan, where our gun season opens on the 15th. And so everything really changes after that. But when you go to a state like Ohio, where I've hunted quite a bit in the past, in that latter part of the month, like you said, the big boys know that the game is still on, and they're still after it. And I've had numerous, or at least multiple, 4 or 5-year-old plus bucks that I've been hunting all day and seeing them at noon or 1. Saw one at 2:30, So yes, I'd say they are not a bad idea at all. They can definitely pan out, but they're hard after doing it for days on end, for weeks on end, if that's what you were doing early November.
Yeah, they are. But, on that note of the gun season thing, if any listeners are sitting there going, well, yeah, I'm going to be sitting out there with a rifle, get in someplace tight and sit all day. Because if you have that gun season open, you know what most of your competition is going to do. They're going to go hunt in the mornings. They're going to go hunt the evenings. Maybe they'll put on some drives in the middle of the day. But most of your competition isn't loading up for an all-day sit in one spot with some good cover.
So let's talk about that more, because we do have another question from a guy named Mike, who is asking about what you would recommend or what we would recommend doing, on opening day of gun season or those first few days into gun season. And I think you bring up a good point. His question was like, should I hunt the best food source or a travel corridor? But so many people, you've actually done, I think, some Foundations episodes about this at one point. So many people want to set up for gun season in these spots where they can see 200, 300 yards. You and I have also seen a different approach probably being better sometimes. You want to walk us through your thoughts on the better way to be situated for those gun season days?
Yeah, I'm far from a gun hunting expert, but my experience doing that is go big on your first sit. Opening day, sit where you really want to be. If that's the best food source or the power line or the clear cut or wherever you can reach out and stretch and shoot them a long ways away, go nuts. But when that's over, in my experience anyway, it's always been time to get into where you're almost hunting at bow hunting ranges and hunt the cover. And, so many gun hunters, they just go, well, I have my spot. It's my ladder stand or my box blind, and that's where I sit. And it's like, these deer, they figure this stuff out so fast. And the rut's still happening. They're still going to chase and cruise, but they're not going to engage in a bunch of risky behavior, crossing open stuff. And so I think the best strategy for a lot of gun hunters would just be to have one dreamy location that's pretty standard, and then one thick, gnarly, I might shoot 40 yards, 50 yards tops type of spot, and make that switch as long as the wind's right for it, and get in there where they're going to go to those little sanctuaries.
Well, especially if you hunt, and this might be different in a low pressure area, but in a heavily hunted area, like here in Michigan, the only reason there is a buck in the places that I hunt that makes it to 4 or 5 years old is because he has a little hellhole that he buries himself in during gun season. If you can find that hellhole and get there before that old buck comes in to his one little place he can stay safe, you can kill him. But you're not going to kill that big deer in most places with a lot of pressure, on that field edge. He's going to be in that thick cover because the only reason he made it to 4 or 5 years old is because he was one of those bucks that found a spot like that.
Yep.
So, I think our buddy Andy May had a situation exactly like this, like 2 years ago, maybe. I was just listening to him tell a story the other day where he did this exact thing. Everyone on opening day gun season wants to be in these field edge spots. His buddies were in field edge spots. He knew of one nasty thick patch of cover on this piece of property he had permission on, and just got in there like 2 hours before daylight, got right in the hellhole, and waited. And like an hour and a half after daylight, this buck was right there, and he shot him at like 40 yards, I think, with his gun. So it's a good way to go about it. If you're in a low pressure place, it's different. If you are, when I'm up in northern Michigan, where there's not a lot of deer and everything's a sanctuary, it's a little bit different. But I think that it's worth going against the grain when it comes to gun season if you hunt that kind of area. And the all day thing, like you're saying, the all day thing's another against the grain because everybody else wants to go out and do the lunch thing. You can take advantage of that.
Yeah, and that northern Michigan example is a good one because people listen to this and go, well, I don't have I have this mono habitat, right? Like I have thousands of acres of timber company land or whatever I hunt. But I look at that kind of deer hunting just like I look at an over-the-counter elk hunt. Like, okay, so you have thousands and thousands of acres to work with. Where are the access points? Where are the trails? Up in northern Michigan, I'm sure you're dealing with logging roads and 2 tracks and specific access points. And those deer, even if they have tons of different swamps to bed in and hide out in, they're still going to adjust themselves according to where the pressure's coming in and where the pressure's sitting. And so, you can find those places where there's going to be that concentration. And yeah, it might not be the same concentration you'd find in, Iowa or Missouri or something like that, where the deer population's super high, but those deer are still reacting to that pressure. They're still ending up somewhere, and those bucks know where the does are hiding out. They know where they're going to be going to search. And to me, it's just like figuring that stuff out, and especially getting out right after the gun season's over and going and walking through some of that stuff is like a crazy eye opener in how deer avoid us.
Yeah. So speaking of the all day sit, then Flint asked about how we keep our head in the game after you do like multiple all day sits, and that grind really starts wearing on you. What'd you learn this year after doing almost 7 of those, or whatever it was? How'd you fight back the midday woes?
Man, to me, it's just sitting in a place that I have confidence. Like if I'm in a place where I'm like, it could just happen here, that's a big deal for me. It really is. If I'm in a place where I'm like, I don't think so. Like I had to do almost 2 full all day sits in box blinds this year because of that rain.
Oh, yeah.
And the camera gear considerations and all that BS. And man, I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I hate this because I don't have confidence in killing a big one out of one of those. And so if you're doing your homework and you're like, this funnel or this pinch point should be banging, or I'm downwind of this really, really thick stuff, even when the action's slow, the action for me this whole first week of November was slow, but getting into those spots was good enough to keep me there all day and just get me to believe that it was probably going to happen. And it's a huge component of it.
Okay. So devil's advocate on this a little bit though. I have been, and this comes down to partially my shift in trying to have more fun with hunting this year, and partially with a practical thing. So I have decided to give my permission to take a few days off from all day hunts because they're miserable, but also because, if you get so burnt out doing 6 or 7 of those that you're not focused on day 8, then maybe you miss out on an opportunity entirely because it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon and you're so burnt out and sick and tired of doing this 7 days in a row that then you're not fully with it. And so I've told myself, well, you know what? If you have to do a couple of those things, A, to keep this fun, and B, to keep you fresh, maybe that's worth it actually in the long run when it all nets out. Is that me just being a lazy POS, or is that a reasonable thing to consider too?
No, that's you being a lazy POS. That's just no discipline there, and no real desire to actually be a hunter, I guess. No. I would say there's 2 ways to look at it, right? Like the all day sit in its like most basic form is you go out to your stand or you go saddle up and you're there dark to dark. I do that a lot, but I also will structure some of my days so it's like, I know I'm going to sit this spot until noon, and then I'm going to pull up and I'm going to move somewhere else. So even though you're really kind of almost hunting all day, now you've got that little break up in the middle, and maybe you walk to the other end of the farm or something like that. But to me, if you're like, I really want to enjoy this rut, you gotta be there in the woods. And if you're fading bad and you can't handle it and you need to sleep in, go ahead. Like, who cares? It's just a deer. But I always just look at it and I go, like, try to figure out a way to stay out there. Like, bring enough coffee, bring a book, whatever you got to do. Try to figure out a way to just be there, because this is a short window thing, man. And every all day that you have to be out there, you really only have like 11 hours to be there. So it's not like a crazy big ask of us. I mean, some people really have a hard time with it, but you go out and you kill one at noon or 1 o'clock one time, and it sure changes your perspective on it,
Yeah, man, it's an interesting thing. I've been thinking about it more and more for the last 15 years. I basically looked at all day sits as mandatory unless you want to be a lazy POS. And so I did them like every single day. And then I looked, and I have yet to kill a midday buck ever. And I've hunted a lot of what should have been good bedding, should be good midday spots. Thick, nasty cover, funnels back in the cover, doe bedding, all that kind of stuff. I had one that I absolutely should have killed, but was looking at a book instead as the buck came up behind me. And then I've had a handful of like seeing good bucks moving through, just couldn't get a shot. So it's possible, but it's yet to pay off for me myself. But I know plenty of people who have. Have you had a lot of those middays? I know you killed one last year midday.
No, I haven't. I've killed a few. I killed one last year at 1:00, and that was November 6th, and it was going to happen. And I honestly think if I hadn't killed my buck last week, I think I killed him at like 9:30 or something in the morning. But I honestly think if I hadn't killed that buck, another one would have come through between like 10 and 2. I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
But even so, I think there's a difference of going in all day. Like your mentality's different, and you're not like second guessing it. You're not like, oh, I got to leave, or I'm going to go, or I was going to leave at noon anyway, so I'll leave at 11. You're just like, I'm just there, and there's less of an impact on the woods.
Yeah.
And so I think overall, it's just, we had such an interesting experiment with 1 week in November because we had Giannis this year. And man, Giannis checks into that group chat, and he's moving, and he's moving, and he's moving, and he's moving. And you're like, dude, you got to maybe pump the brakes on this a little bit. But it's so easy for people to talk themselves into going, the rut's not happening here, so I'm going to move.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're not probably going to move and find like a magical difference. Like you might get into a better spot, but if you're sitting there and you're in a spot that you're pretty confident in and it's a pinch point or something like that, and it's really not going that great yet, the odds of just like discovering the place where it's blowing up, especially on a smaller property, it's not that likely. So it's like, okay, do you sit tight and let the rut come to you, or do you keep going and going and going to find it? Like, I honestly don't know what's a better strategy, but I know what I pick.
I feel like it is the question for the rut, at least for me. Like every single year during the rut, that is the debate I'm having nonstop. If it's slow, I'm constantly debating, and I was doing this all last week. I was debating, do I search it out, or do I trust this place I'm in? Do I trust this feature? Do I trust this habitat edge? Do I trust this bedding area? And basically on my hunt last week, I had 2 spots that I just really believed should work. I mean, it was great wind situation, downwind of an epic doe bedding area. I had a really cool thing going on there in these 2 locations, and I ended up giving one spot a day and a half, and the next day with a wind shift, I switched to the other side of it. And didn't see a single buck in those 3 days that I was hunting in this spot, this 2 sides of this bedding area that I thought should be amazing. And so I'm having this debate back and forth with myself, and I'm thinking, man, at the end of the hunt, I was like, am I an idiot? Did I spend too much time in this little zone? Now, again, it's a 32-acre property. I really didn't have any other great options. But I checked my trail cameras the next day, so the day we left. So the morning after I was there was a shooter buck in front of my tree stand in that spot that I had spent the last day and a half. So it was one of those cases, like if I didn't have to leave and I'd stuck it out there the next morning, I could have got a shot at one of these big bucks. He didn't come through the previous day and a half, but eventually they will if you're in a place that you have experience or confidence in. So yeah, it's a tough one.
There's 2 ways to look at that, though. I mean, that's the easiest conclusion to draw. But the other thing that I would question is, did that buck not come through when you were there because you were there?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I always wrestle with this when you have trail camera intel and you're like, oh man, he was there this time, whatever. It's like, well, you weren't. And there's always like that little nagging thought, like maybe he wouldn't have come through there if you were there. And I just, there's no way of knowing, but I always think about that because we beat ourselves up and go, geez, I should have been there. And it's like, well, yeah, it would have been better to be there than not, but it's not a foregone conclusion that you'd all of a sudden got that 20-yard broadside at him,
Yeah, true. I don't think, like you said, we'll ever have the perfect answer to this question. It's just a thing that with your own personal experience and the information at hand, you've got to make the best judgment call.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land? Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Galen asks, how do you manage a rut hunt with corn still standing in your area? So standing corn rut. A lot of times people worry this is going to have all the deer going to be chasing and doing their thing in the standing corn. You'll never see it. You'll never get a chance of these bucks. What's been your take, Tony?
I've dealt with that quite a bit in Minnesota because we have such an early gun season that I hit it so hard. The last couple days of October, first couple days of November, and I've just dealt with a lot of standing corn, and I kind of look at it like that really thick patch of cover that I have to set up downwind of. I mean, it's dumb, but if you're in a place with some pressure, those deer are going to bed in there. A lot of times they're going to use it for food, of course, and it's just a sanctuary. Like, it just is. But you can find places downwind of a cornfield where those bucks are going to cruise it. And if you can get into one of those spots where there's like a little grassy waterway or something, man, like, that's kind of the ticket. And so, yeah, it kind of sucks because you're like, oh, if they picked this corn, these deer would be in the woods. Well, that's not the hand you were dealt. The next best thing is just to use it to your advantage as much as possible. And, it's, I don't know, I've killed a lot of deer on the edges of standing corn. Let me put it that way. I think you get downwind and you play it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that you alluded to one example, but anywhere you can find diversity in that corn. So by that, I mean, like you said, like a waterway or any point of timber that sticks out into a cornfield, or if there's a little strip of timber that intersects two cornfields or something like that, anywhere you have that difference in habitat type where you create edge or any kind of opening, like there was a spot I used to have where there was a big oak tree that stood out on the edge of two properties, and it was usually there'd be standing corn on either side of it, and then there was this big opening underneath this oak tree, and every deer that was in that corn would check out that oak tree. There was, always feeding sign underneath it. There were deer bedded underneath it sometimes. So those kinds of spots can be, worth focusing on when you've got that standing corn situation. But like you said, I would look at standing corn as, great bedding, get on the edge of it. Those bucks make scrapes all along those edges. They cruise those edges. They're not, despite what you think, going to live their entire life in that corn. They're still going to come out. They need diversity in their diet. A deer that ate nothing but corn all day, every day, would not be a healthy deer. They're still going to come out and explore these other places. So it's not the end of the world.
Yeah. It can actually be kind of a benefit to you if you have the right way to use it.
Yeah. JT asks, how long should you wait to hunt a spot on public land again if a buck busts you in that spot? So a public land hunt, you get busted in the tree. How long would you wait before coming back to that zone?
7 seconds.
7 seconds. Explain.
Yeah. Well, if he's there, somebody else is going to be there. Right? I mean, man, there aren't any accidents out there in nature, right? Like, I mean, there are, but there aren't. Like, nature doesn't do random very well. So if you've done your homework and you got into a spot and, maybe your target buck or a good buck spots you, that sucks. But you did a lot right to get to that point. And it's not like you blow that deer out. It's not like he's the only one. My bigger concern with something like that is, why did he bust me?
That's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if he's, and that stuff happens, I mean, I was thinking about this year. I mean, when you're doing these hanging hunts on public land, you're at such a disadvantage for that stuff because you don't know, like, you go in there and you got to set up where you can set up, and it might not be the most ideal tree that you can trim all the way up or do whatever. And you get picked off, and it happens. So it's like, is the spot good enough? And was it did it just break bad for you? Or are you in a situation where you're going to get busted by whoever comes in, and it's time to rethink that setup and rework that spot?
And I think that's my take in a lot of situations, whether it's public or private. If you get busted from a tree, figure out why, and you might want to make a small adjustment and a move just because of that. But then if you are after one specific buck, even like I had this happen a few years ago, and then this actually happened to a friend of mine yesterday. He had this exact scenario, but on private, and he texted our little group, and he said, I just had this big giant buck come in, circled downwind of me, busted me, he's out. I'm thinking I should just pull the plug on the whole thing probably. And I said, well, are there any other deer you want to kill in there? He's like, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, you kind of are in the spot. Is there another tree where you'd have a better situation for wind? Because that zone just proved it's a winner. Like your general spot proved itself as a winner. But that specific buck, I don't know about you, but during the rut, I've had a mature buck wind me in a spot like that and then still come back within sight of me later in the day because of does. I think does can make bucks do dumber stuff than usual, as we all know this time of year. So I had, in one case, I had this shooter buck come downwind of me just before shooting light, so I couldn't get a shot at him. He wins me, busts out of there, and then like an hour later, he's chasing does and gets almost to within shooting range of me again because of that. Yep. And I think in that scenario, just even, readjusting a little bit for the next day. I mean, A, the same tree might work, but B, if you just shift over 40 yards or something like that, I think you're probably right back in the game still, and you could still take advantage of whatever the feature is that got him there in the first place, and then give yourself a little peace of mind that he's not going to be staring up in that same tree if he does slip back through in the next day or whatever it is. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about it too much. If you have like 15 does wind you a doe wins you every hour, every 2 hours, you've got another thing like that. Maybe you've got a bigger problem and you need to shift to a new zone because of that. But one single buck, I wouldn't worry about it too much.
Yeah, and I mean, it really depends on why he got you too. I mean, if he was just traveling downwind and he got you, then the setup's probably not great for those conditions. But if you saw him 100 yards out and you called to him and he swung downwind like you were talking about with your buddy or whatever, like different thing, And I think that's one thing people kind of forget during the rut because they go out there with all their calls and everything, and they're like, man, if I see one, I'm going to grunt him in. And there's situations where that's just a bad idea because how they're going to approach you. So you've called attention to yourself, and now you've set up an encounter that's less likely to break your way. And I'll just give you a quick example of that. When I was in South Dakota in the beginning of October, I was sitting on some public and finally found what I thought was a concentration of good buck sign, and had like a 130 come out just on the wrong trail. And the way he was headed, he could get away and not win me, possibly. But if I called to him, it was almost a guarantee that he was going to swing downwind and I had no chance. And so I just let the situation unfold. I didn't kill him. And then the camera guy I was with, he's like, "Why didn't you grunt to that deer?" And I was like, "Because there's no way where he was and the way our wind was blowing that he was going to just turn and march right in and not use that wind."
Yeah.
And so that's something you always have to think about when you're making contact with them. Is like, how easy is it for them to use their nose? Because they're gonna. And is it better to not draw attention to yourself, let the whole thing play out naturally, and figure out what to do next time?
Yeah, very true. I've got another question that kind of naturally fits into this discussion. Chad asks, are you concerned about overhunting stand locations in the rut? I think that's kind of related to some of the stuff we're talking about here. What do you think?
I think you're always worried about overhunting locations, and you just got to let the deer tell you whether you are or you aren't. And the other thing to that, a component to that is, it is really hard to not go into a place you want to hunt bad during the rut and sandbag it and wait for better opportunities. But man, that happens to me. Last 2 years, the 2 bucks I've killed in Wisconsin, I've had to sandbag it and basically kind of waste sits waiting on the right conditions to go where I wanted to. And that is a hard thing to do, but sometimes you got to do it.
Has that ever bit you in the ass?
Probably dozens of times. I mean, it's hard to know because you either go in or you don't, and you don't know how it would shake out if you took the other option. But for me now, I find myself just planning, like, what do my next 2 days look like? Right? Like, what do I need to do, and where do I have the most faith in a spot, and what do the conditions say about it? And sometimes you're just like, I can't rationalize going in there today when tomorrow is going to set up real well. And so it's like, I'm going to leave that whole thing alone. And, it gets different when you're on public and somebody might go in there, or, you're on private that has a bunch of people on it. They're so situationally variable, but being a little bit cautious with your best setups is usually a good idea.
Yeah. Another consideration here is how to define overhunting, right? And you said, listen to what the deer tell you, which I think is a good thing, but you need to know, based on the context of where you're hunting and what you know about the area, you have to have like a sliding scale of how you interpret what the deer tell you. And a big part of that is like deer density is a big thing right there, right? So if you are hunting a stand 3 days in a row in southern Michigan where, you could easily see 20 or more deer in a day, and there's deer everywhere, you could very easily burn out a spot if you're getting winded by doe after doe and a buck and a doe and a buck and a buck and 2 does and 5 does and all that kind of stuff. That could hit fast. If you were to take those same 3 days and hunt up in northern Michigan, where I might see 1 or 2 deer a day, 3 days might be, not even enough time to sit in the right spot, because it might take 4 days for one mature buck to pass through this little terrain feature or whatever it is I'm hunting. Like, he won't come through because they're traveling miles, and there's only going to be 1 day in 5 that buck comes through. So in that kind of spot, or the big woods up in Pennsylvania or somewhere, you might need to spend days in a saddle. Like a terrain saddle, or days on that pinch or whatever it is for a deer to pass through. So you need to look at your situation and say, all right, how much pressure can this spot handle, and how much time is necessary for me to even have a chance at one of these deer working through this area? I think that's a key consideration.
Well, and not only that, but also just what kind of impact are you putting on it with every sit? Some places, I killed a buck in North Dakota on public a few years ago, and the spot I found, I think I could have hunted that every day. The way I accessed it it was through like a pasture. There were no cows in there at that point, but that federal land had been grazed. There weren't any deer in there. I wasn't blowing deer going out in there, and I had this great big river bluff beside me that the wind could blow like most directions, and the cruising bucks weren't going to get you. It was almost perfect. And then you get to other spots where you're like, man, I got to, where I killed my buck last week in Wisconsin, if you get the right wind, it's amazing. If you get wind that's not right, and I mean real right, then you're going to put that whole valley down. And so it's really kind of dependent on that too.
Yeah, very, very true. All right. Adam asks, I have a beard. Do you think that switching to a mustache would change my rut hunting luck? And I'll just come right out and say, absolutely, Adam. I believe that will be the case. Make the switch. Tony, do you have any kind of opinion on this?
I think Adam absolutely would look amazing in a mustache, and he should definitely do it.
All right.
He should even maybe dye it like red or something.
Oh, wow. Really, really go strong with it.
Just own it, Adam.
There you go. Greeny asks, what actually triggers the rut? Does the cold weather have anything to do with it or start it? Tony, you and I have both talked about this many times, but you want to take a stab at tackling this one for people that aren't familiar?
Yep. Photoperiodism.
What's that?
That is the amount of daylight that those deer are getting every day and how much of it's reaching their brain. And those little fawns have to be born at a very specific window every spring. And we need this natural phenomenon called prey saturation to hit, where as many fawns as possible hit in the same small period of time so that the predators just can't clean them out. Just like when you have 800 billion tadpoles and little frogs in your backyard, if you have a pond, there's a reason for that, because it ensures the survival of enough of them. Now, I can't remember who said it. You've probably said it on here a billion times, but some wildlife biologist or some famous deer person said that photoperiodism cocks the gun, but weather pulls the trigger. And so for us, in the interest of daylight movement and those dreamy, just banging rut days, then yeah, the weather is huge for those, because you'll get that really special day if it gets cold and it's just the right conditions. But that rut's going to happen either way. Yeah,
I think that, like you said, like another way I've heard it put is that the weather, like the photo period, daylight, that impacts, the rut, the breeding actually happening. The weather will reveal it in daylight. So if you have the right weather, we'll simply get to see more of it and more intense daylight activity during the day when we are out there as hunters. So yeah, it's happening, right now across most states in the northern half of the country. Peak breeding is usually somewhere around the middle of November. But it's a bell curve, so you got to remember, like, there's peak breeding in the middle, but there's still breeding going to be happening earlier than that. There's still going to be breeding happening after that. And so, when this podcast drops, this is kind of what most people would refer to as maybe in that lockdown period, when the most does of all year are ready to be bred and are being bred with a buck. So there was a question from someone basically just asking what our key ideas were for the lockdown stage and what to do during it and what to do just after it. So Tony, if somebody's listening today on November 17th or 18th or 19th and they've noticed that, man, the activity has really slowed down, not getting a lot of deer on camera, I'm not seeing much, what do you do in that situation?
Man, for me, it's just get in tight to the thickest stuff and stay downwind. Because those open woods, those open fields, it's just not, it never happens for me in the back half of November. It's always tight cover, thick stuff.
And faith.
Lots of faith.
I feel like that's a big one during lockdown, because no matter if every single doe is in heat on a particular day, there's always going to be a buck that breaks off at some point. Like, it's going to happen. It's not happening super often, maybe. It's not happening as much as it's happening 10 days earlier. Crap. Did I lose you there?
You did, just for a second.
All right, I'll jump right back in.
You were, hold on, Mark. You were saying there's always going to be a buck, and then I lost you.
Okay. There's always going to be a buck that's breaking off of a doe at some point, right? There will be bucks breaking off and searching out new ones. So you'll have these short windows of opportunity where there's a deer, again, seeking out a new doe. You just have to be out there, staying focused, and with faith that it can actually happen. It brings up, though, another situation which is, what about seeing a buck locked on a doe? This is something I've had happen a number of times now, and I've seen it work in my favor, and I've seen it work against me. And there's a lot of different thoughts on what to do. Some people see a buck bedded with a doe or standing with a doe and think to themselves, man, that buck's not going anywhere. I can make a move and stalk in and try to kill him. There's other people that would never consider doing that. There's other people that will tell you that you can zoom in on that spot maybe the next morning or something, because they usually don't travel a whole lot when a buck's locked on a doe. Lots of times that buck will kind of push a doe into a little tiny patch of cover away from all the other deer, and they just kind of hang out in that zone or kind of close to it for that, 48 hours or whatever it ends up being. What's been your approach, or what are the different variables that will impact how you would deal with that scenario, Tony?
You got to look at what Mother Nature's given you. If you have a 25 mile per hour winds and they're in a approachable spot, it's time to get down and go. If you have some rain and they're in a stalkable situation, it's time to get down and go. If it's 2 mile per hour winds and it's really, really dry and, you'd have to belly crawl across 300 yards of, pasture to get there, it's probably not time to go. It's probably time to figure out how do I get there tomorrow morning? But seeing that is like such a gift. It might not work your way, but seeing a buck locked on a doe like that, where he's not going anywhere, and there's a lot of ways to use that to your advantage. And so I look at that and go, that's a huge gift if you can see it, even if it doesn't go your way.
Well, so many people talk about how you can't pattern a buck during the rut, right? Because they're so unpredictable. But this is one of those scenarios where they kind of do get predictable.
Yep.
In most cases, at least from what I've seen, when you see a buck on a doe, a couple things. Number one, he's not going anywhere else. He's staying close to that doe. Number two, unless it's like chase, like I'm not talking chasing. I'm talking like a buck standing with a doe and they're just like there. I've never seen deer like that move a ton. I've seen them kind of travel maybe from a bedding area to a food source and back, but I've never seen them cover major distance. And I've seen a pattern develop there. I killed a buck in this exact way. I saw a buck locked on a doe, follow that doe into this edge of this bedding cover, and I thought, man, that doe is going to be right back on that edge of the food this evening. I watched this happen in the morning, and I just know this is the food source. If a deer bed's there, that doe's going to pop back out and feed it here again, at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock or whatever. And I know that buck will be with her. Sure enough, that's what happened. So I think you can look at this as hey, how do I move in on this pattern? And no, it's not going to last very long, right? You've got a 24 or 48 hour window, something like that, because you don't know when they came together. But I would get aggressive with that kind of thing. If I see that, I'm swinging for the fences because I've got more information than almost any other time when you're hunting. So I would push in that kind of situation. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, big time. I mean, that's really kind of the time to go for broke, because that's a gift of an opportunity that's going to go away from you. I mean, and you're right. They don't really seem to go anywhere. And the other thing that occasionally happens in that situation is every other buck in the woodlot swings through downwind to see if he can take a poke at her. There's, I don't know, that's the cool part about the lockdown.
And here's one other thing. All that's going for you. You also have the perfect distraction. So that buck is as unfocused as he will ever be on a predator. So you might be able to get away with more than you otherwise could, because there's all sorts of other deer running around, circling him. Like you said, there's the whole satellite thing going on. He's used to pushing off other bucks. He's very, very focused on protecting his doe right there. So this is a time when you might be able to sneak in close and spook some does maybe, or spook a younger buck, and he might completely ignore it, or he might not care because he's used to that running around, or he's used to other stuff going on. So don't be afraid to get a little aggressive, whether that be sneaking into stock or, slipping in and trying to set up a stand where you think they're going to move back through in the afternoon or whatever it is. I think you have a number of things going for you, assuming, conditions are right? Doing that kind of aggressive move, as you mentioned, if it's zero wind and super crunchy leaves, that might be a lot harder to pull off. But you got some things going for you.
Definitely.
Here's another question from Joe, and it's about the same question. We've got a few things around this. Lockdown doe. I don't know about this. I'd be curious your opinion on this. Joe asks, have you seen a buck typically lock down does again and again in the same area? Or is the location dependent on the doe? So do you think that where a buck will lock down with a doe, is that the buck's decision, like that's a buck thing? Or is this like, well, each doe he hooks up with is going to pull him to some different place? Have you noticed this before?
I'm gonna go on a limb and say Joe is not married, because I think the doe chooses. I don't think this is the buck's choice at all. I think that doe is like, this is where I'm going, and you come along for the ride if you want, bro. And he's like, yes, please, I will. But I just don't think a buck could really push a doe consistently where she didn't want to go.
Yeah. Now here's not a devil's advocate kind of position, but yes, but kind of thought. I have seen a single buck, a specific buck, locked down with different does throughout the rut in the same general pocket. And I wonder if that's not necessarily him being in control of the situation, but rather that he finds a pocket of does and he returns to them throughout the month of November or early December. And as he returns to them, they suck him into the same general zone for that lockdown, because that's where this doe family group or two doe family groups is. So it might kind of look like this is his zone he likes to push does, but it's more so, hey, I found a good spot for females and I'm returning to it multiple times. I think maybe that's what's happening.
Big time. And I'm sure so much of that is just tied to, a layer of thicker cover on a property.
Yeah.
And they're just ending up where they end up because that's where the does bed and the bucks know it.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land? Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Here's one that people had to deal with earlier in this month. Hopefully people aren't dealing with this in the second half of the month, but I'm sure there's going to be people in the South. Bricken asks about our favorite tactics when the movement is slow and the weather is warm during what should be the rut. We already talked about how weather can kind of reveal more daylight activity. My take on this is I'm not doing much different when it's warm. I'm simply knowing that I got to push through the harder times. This kind of goes back to what you do during the lockdown. You just got to have faith. You got to stick with your rut plan, and you just know that it will happen eventually. Maybe not middle of the day like I was hoping, but it'll still happen in the morning. It'll still happen in the evening. You know, I killed my buck on a 80-degree day. November 1st, 80 degrees. They didn't start moving till 45 minutes before dark. So zero movement from, 8:30 until 45 minutes before dark. But they moved at the end. So I don't get fancy during the warm weather. I just tough it out and kind of know in my head, well, this is going to suck a little bit, but we'll make the best of it. Anything different for you?
Not really. I mean, unless you have a limited water source, then yeah, I'll get on that, because I've seen deer that are chasing hard that will hit that water, But otherwise, to me, there's a difference between being way on top of a ridge and, it's 80 degrees there, or being way down in the bottom by a little creek where it might be 75 degrees and there's water. Little things like that, those microclimates. But really, to me, it's just like, I look at it and go, okay, they're not going to be probably cruising out in the wide open in the sunlight all day long when it's 80 degrees, but they're going to be looking somewhere.
Yeah.
And again, that brings you back into the cover, and will it be subdued compared to what it would be if it was 25 degrees? Sure. But they're still there. They're still going to do their thing. And so it's a matter of just staying out there and having faith in your spots again.
Yep. Here's a flip side of that question. Crundle asks, I hope that's his real name. I hope his first name is Crundle, because that'd be a hell of a name. You get the perfect weather event of temperatures dropping 35 degrees overnight, but the wind direction is bad. Do you still hunt?
Well, the wind direction's bad for everything? That's what I would ask Crundle.
Yeah.
Hey, that's why you don't just pin your hopes on, this is my spot. Because I don't know, I could never imagine a situation where I wouldn't, even on small properties, like 20 acres, where you probably couldn't swing a different setup and use that weather to your advantage and just find something new where the wind works.
Yeah. You always have to give up something, and maybe you have to give up a little bit more, but especially during the rut, if you're going to push it a little bit, man, now's the time. During the rut with a 35-degree temperature drop, sign me up. I'm out there. I'll find the best possible scenario, and go with it.
Yep. Well, and not only that, but okay, so you think, man, I have this set up and the wind sucks for it. It's like that's a bummer. But you also have a situation where all of the bucks are going to be looking and they're going to be using their nose. So that wind, even if it's not right for where you want to sit, is really going to position those deer, and you can count on that.
Yeah.
So in a way, even a crappy wind gives you an advantage when the conditions are just perfect to cruise.
Yeah. So this kind of ties into a question from a guy named Elliot. And he basically just says, does wind direction still play a big role during the rut, or is it more just if you have the does, ... And so I'm not exactly sure what he means by this, but I think I'll kind of extrapolate out to it, which is, can you get away with more stuff during the rut with wind because of the fact that they're just focused on does? That's a question, I guess. And so my answer to that is, yeah, wind still matters. Yeah, you're still going to get busted if you're not set up smart. So you do need to play the wind. You do need to be smart about it, et cetera, et cetera. But B, kind of back to what I said a minute ago, if you're ever going to try something a little bit more risky, or if you're ever going to give up a little bit more, or if you're ever going to take a swing for the fences and, play all your cards, bet the house, this is not a bad time to do it. So just know that you're not going to beat their nose, so you better have a darn good chance of avoiding their nose, or you better have something that's going to play, into the strategy you want. So don't set up in a spot where there's no chance that you can be on the upwind side of things. But if you have to maybe hunt a cutting wind, or if you have to spot, or if you have to hunt a place where, to kill the buck, the way I think a buck's going to use this, I'm great, but I know probably some does are going to get downwind of me at some point. So most times I would never hunt here. Well, if you get that cold front, and this is a spot that bucks always cruise through on November 18th or whatever, I might be willing to hunt this spot on that great day, even though I know there will be some does that bust me. I'll know there's a chance the buck can cruise an upwind and I can kill him. So that's how I interpreted his question. Tony, do you have any other thoughts on that?
No, I mean, I would just say, again, if you look at this like purely academically, we always think about it like, well, I need a west wind that's going to be perfect for this spot. And then you go in and it's just never really what you think sometimes, like the wind's swirling or the wind's doing something a little different. And so you always go, I've got the potential to get caught in this zone, but I'm banking that they're going to come through here. And, like my first setup in Minnesota last week on that public, there was like a little ridge above a kind of cattail slough. And where I expected the deer to come from, I had like maybe 15 degrees from the where the wind was blowing to where it would kill me. And it was just like, okay, if they go this way, I'm in trouble. But if they do what I expect them to do here, I'm going to be okay by a small margin. But it doesn't matter. Even if it's 2 degrees, as long as they don't get me, it doesn't matter. And so you always look at that and go, well, no spot's probably going to be super perfect. And yeah, you're going to have to there's going to be a downside to every one of them as far as wind, but like whatever, like that's just hunting. Like you don't get around that.
Yeah. You have to, I was talking about this the other day. If you never are willing to swing, for the fences, if you're never willing to hunt a great spot or push in and get aggressive with something because you're always so worried about, something bad happening, you're never going to hit a home run. If you're constantly just playing it safe and hitting singles over and over again, that's great, but you're not going to be the home run champion. And when it comes to deer hunting, right, we're trying to hit a home run. It's going to happen once, maybe twice if we're really lucky over the course of a whole hunting season. Never if you never swing for it, though. So, Yeah, you got to give up something. You got to go for it when the time's right, when the situation's right, when the setup is right.
Yeah. Well, and you do get a little bit of grace from the deer during the rut too. I mean, like, that buck that I killed in Wisconsin, he came in from a direction I would have told you it was not going to happen, and he spotted my cameraman getting into position and got a little bit wiggy, but had to go by us to get to where he wanted to go, and gave me a shot. And so we made mistakes that you might not get away with any other time of the season, and then we still. He still gave me a chance. It was a fleeting, lucky to go my way opportunity. But, like that, in a lot of situations, that does not happen. But during the rut, you could get it.
Yeah. Okay, here's a question that I talked a little bit about last week when I was discussing my kill. But I'm curious about your take on this, Tony. Mitchell asks, during this rut time period, so this could be November or maybe even early December when you get that second rut, or, different parts of the country have got later ruts than that. During this rut period, I'm struggling to get bucks to stop for a shot. They're always chasing or locked on a doe and moving. Any ideas?
Just murp them a little louder and a little more persistently. I mean, sometimes they don't stop, but most of the time you can get them to stop. So
yes. What's your? I had this situation last week where I had like a buck that was moving, stopping, moving, stopping, moving, stopping, moving, stopping, and I made the impulse decision of murping when I probably didn't have to murp, and that caused him to jump the string in a big way. So, what's been your experience with that when it's not necessarily a chasing buck, but a buck that's been on the move, stopping, starting, stopping, starting? I think in the moment I was so paranoid about him taking another step and hitting him back that I erred towards, man, I just want him stopped for sure. And then that led to him moving down instead of forward. How have you dealt with that situation?
It's so,
I know intellectually what to do, but it's so hard to do it in the moment when you've got 1,000 things happening.
Yeah. Well, and the enemy of most of us being closers is our paranoia that they're going to get away.
Yeah.
Right. And so it is really easy to default to merping them, even when you don't need to. And so it's just, you kind of got to just read it. I mean, the buck that I shot last week, I had 2 shooting holes that he was going to go through this trail, and there's really thick stuff. And I merped him on the first one and he didn't stop. And I merped him louder on the second one and he stopped, but that was it. If he'd have got through there another foot, it's over. And so in that situation, you're looking at it like, I don't have a choice. That situation you're talking about, yeah, in hindsight, you probably should have just shot him. But it's so hard to just let that go without, like, I need to make this happen this way now.
Yeah. And
so I think this is a really tough thing to talk about, because even with lots of experience, you get it wrong a lot. But my thing, with the original question, if you got a buck that's trucking through there and, it's like do or die time now, I'm going to make that dude stop, or I'm going to scare him. Because what do you have to lose?
Yeah.
And sometimes, like the buck I shot last year in the beginning of 1 week in November, that dude was cruising. I merped him like 5 times before he stopped, and he was 15 yards away. But it's like, just got to ramp up the frequency and cross your fingers,
Yeah. So in that case, you make a bunch of noise to finally get this buck to stop. Do you aim low? Would you always say aim low in that kind of situation because you're assuming jump of the string scenario, or what?
Yeah, I would tell everybody that. I promise you, I've never done that once. Like, yeah. I don't have enough brain power when I've got one right there. I tend to just get that pin where I think it needs to be, and I don't think like, well, 3 inches lower because he's gonna drop.
Yeah,
and sometimes like on that buck you shot, if you watch that versus the buck that I shot, and I think yours was like maybe 5 yards farther than mine, but when I watched the footage of the buck that I shot, he didn't get out of the way hardly at all.
Yeah.
And so, it's kind of like, gosh, which deer is it, and what specific conditions, and what mood did you catch him in, and what are they thinking about? And so it's a crapshoot, man.
Yeah, it really is. There's no perfect answer for every scenario because they're all different. Arrows North asks a question that I think most of us dealt with something like this over the last week, which is, how do you morning hunt a new location? Do you prefer to hang in the pitch dark well before daylight, or do you wait for pink light so you can see stuff? What do you do?
Oh, I hate hanging stands in the dark. I did it too. Our setups, whether I was using stands or I was using saddles, if I have a tree scouted out, which is what I usually try to do, then, and this is a lesson that I learned a lot, is don't say you scouted out a tree until you stood there and you thought about it for like 20 minutes. Like, I'm going up this side and I'm hanging off this side and my shots are here, or, my sticks, like, I'm setting them up this way, like, because it's so easy to walk into a spot and be like, there's my tree, and then walk out and come back, and then you get there and it is way more crooked or way more gnarly than you think. And so I try to make it so I can set up in the dark as quietly as possible and be there way before first light and up. But if you're not that confident, if you don't have a bunch of experience doing that, right at first light might be the way to go.
Yeah. Especially in the rut, when a lot of times the best activity is actually late in the morning anyways, when you're getting those bucks that start cruising, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10:30, whatever it is. You might be able to get away with that first light kind of scenario if you're back in a bedding area or something. I like to be set up before dark as well. I get in there like 2 hours ahead of time just because I'm worried about noise. I'm worried about all that kind of stuff. So I get in there super early. I set up. I always... my approach is slow and smooth and quiet. So I don't worry about rushing it. I try to just take my time, do it right, do it quiet. And then I can sit and be there for 45 minutes before daylight and just feel like everything's calmed down around me. But yeah, it's not fun. It's not easy. It's always disappointing when it gets daylight out and you see, well, there's a branch there and there's a branch there. And, I've had this past week, for example, I was fortunate that we had a lot of windy days. So, there was one day where I got down midday and did a bunch of limb trimming because I got set up in a spot in dark that looked like it would work. And then when it got daylight, I realized, holy smokes, there's almost nowhere I can shoot. because of how thick the cover was in there. So I used that wind to open up a couple lanes. So yeah, that's what I'd err towards, but it's not foolproof doing it that way.
No, I mean, it's so much better to have a stand up and just walk out to it and follow your nice tack trail and climb in quietly.
Yeah, man, that's for sure. I thought about that this year, how even though I mostly saddle hunt on like my local stuff that I hunt year after year after year, at a minimum, I think I'm going to like put ladders or tree steps up more trees just to take that step out at least of extra spots, because it does get tiring setting up a mobile setup up and down, 7 days in a row.
Well, and it doesn't make that much sense if you could set up ahead of time.
Yeah.
Yep.
You're going to do the work. Why not do it ahead of time so that it's easier while you're hunting, it's quieter while you're hunting. Put in that work earlier in the year when it won't hurt you.
Yep.
Rick asks, if I'm hunting all day, that means I have to pee. Just go from the stand, take a bottle. What do you do? This is one that people always ask. Tony, what do you do?
Let her fly, buddy.
Yeah. Same here.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. Okay. What about number 2?
Let her fly. No.
Right from the stand? Our buddy Dan Johnson does that.
Yeah, I was joking with my cameraman a lot about that this year, that he liked to do that while he made eye contact with me the whole time. No, I mean, I think number 2, maybe get down and save yourself some embarrassment, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's situations where you could just drop a bomb off there and.
Okay, but in all seriousness, do you think that if you had to do that a deer would get freaked out by that smell or be like attracted to it? Like, what is this?
I have a hard time believing they'd be attracted to it, but I don't think they'd be spooked by it.
See, I've wondered, I've never had this happen, so I've never seen it, but I wonder, like, would it be like a curiosity thing? Like, holy shit, what is that? And kind of just like swing further downwind of it and be, curious, like, what is this? Because it'd be like an overwhelming smell that's different than usual. I've worried about that. Like, so I've positioned, if I have to do it, like, I won't poop upwind. I'll go downwind where a deer would win me anyways. So you gotta be tactical with all decisions, Tony.
Jesus Christ. I don't know, man. I guess you just have to experiment and drop a growler in different spots and see how they react. I don't know.
We'll report back on this in a few years once we have more experience.
Yeah.
Okay. How about one more, and then we'll wrap this up so that folks can get out to the woods. My rutcation is coming to the end. What is one out of the box idea I should consider for mid to late November on my next chance?
I guess you would say maybe try a still hunt or something like that. I mean, I think that person's looking for, hey, use a decoy or, get out there and rattle, but I wouldn't. I mean, maybe I'm too boring for this, but my shake it up strategy is always just to ask myself a question like, where's a wild spot I never hunt that they could just be there? Like, where have I written off, or where am I just like, that's not the place? And is it now? Like, is it worth, like, is there enough curiosity there to just take a flyer on a day and be like, I'm going to go someplace that for whatever reason hasn't drawn me in before, but I'm not seeing them here. I'm not seeing them here. And I'm just going to take a leap on one of these and go find it. And I say that because I've done that a lot. Like, my dad was like that with his hunting. He would do stupid shit all the time. And you're like, why are you doing this? And he'd be like, I was just curious to see if they'd come in there. And it sometimes works because it's not typical whitetail hunting.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one other thing I would add would be to kind of do the opposite in order to find that place. And so what I mean by that is once you get to, the second or the last third of November, let's say, there's been a lot of hunting pressure in most places. And in many states, there's already been a gun season that's kicked into gear. So now deer have really changed their patterns. Stuff is different in late November than it was 2 weeks ago, significantly different than it was 6 weeks ago. And since the rut hit, let's say late October, the first couple weeks of November, most of us have been like diving into our honey holes. We've been hunting our best stuff. We're in the thick cover. We're hunting doe bedding areas. We're hunting pinch points back in cover, whatever it is. We're in the stuff. The end of November might be a time to go to an observation stand, go to somewhere where you can glass or see some new country, or just maybe not see far, but just observe something different and try to learn. Like, if you're not in them now, get out and find where they are. So either, like you said, plunge into that off-the-wall place that you never go to, or get to a place where you can watch several spots like that. Maybe you are just driving the back roads and glassing different spots, but just figure out, if you don't know this already, I would recommend trying to take a day off from your rut grind maybe, and on November 23rd or whatever, seek out where is that new hotspot of activity. Where is that little spot? Where's the sink that all the deer have pushed into because of pressure everywhere else that maybe you weren't expecting? So that's one more idea that, I don't think many people would do observation sits in November, but if you don't know where they're at this point, you might need to refine and figure out what these deer are doing to adjust to that pressure. So that's an idea.
You could also, have an enormous meal at Taco Bell and then drink some espressos and then go out there and just blow mud all the way around your stand and wait for the curiosity to kick in.
That's a really good way to come 360 on this. Put a bow on it, and give you some real original content here on Wired to Hunt, folks. So
we are really breaking some boundaries here, buddy.
Yeah, I think we've really set the stage for the end of our careers, but so it goes. Any final thoughts, Tony, before we send folks on their way?
Just keep going. Figure out a way to stay warm. Hand warmers, whatever you got to do, the right food, the right entertainment, however you got to do it, and keep after it because there's still some time left.
Yeah, it's possible. Know that there will be slow days. Know that there are going to be some moments of suck, but enjoy it for what it is. Stick it out. Have fun, and good things are still ahead.
Big time.
Thanks, Tony.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. Thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate it. Hope your November has been great so far. I hope the second half of the month is even better if you're still after it. Wishing you all the luck in the world. Appreciate you being a part of this community. Make sure you are following all the stuff we've got going on over at Wired to Hunt and the Meat Eater website. And until next time, thank you. Get out there and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.
Outdoor adventure won't wait for engine problems. Things like hard starts, rough performance, and lost fuel economy are often caused by fuel gum and varnish buildup. Seafoam can help your engine run better and last longer. You simply pour a can into your gas tank. Hunters and anglers rely on Seafoam to keep their engines running the way it should the entire season. So pick up a can of Seafoam today at your local auto parts store or visit seafoamworks.com to learn more.